The hushed opulence of the gilded cage clung to every velvet drape and polished chrome surface, a suffocating silence where fortunes were forged and reputations shattered. Celeste moved through it like a ghost, her light blue dress and crisp white apron a soft blur against the sharp edges of wealth. At 25, she possessed a quiet beauty, her observant eyes missing nothing, though her demeanor was one of practiced invisibility. Tonight, however, invisibility was a luxury she couldn't afford. A heavy, almost palpable tension had settled over the exclusive penthouse dining room, radiating from the solitary figure seated at the corner table, his presence a dark star consuming all light. Mr. Kong, they called him, the Korean Tycoon. A man whose reputation preceded him like a storm front, a titan whose whims dictated markets and whose ire could bring empires to their knees. He was here for a clandestine meeting, a negotiation of staggering proportions that had already seen 3 high-powered intermediaries falter, each leaving the table more bewildered and infuriated than the last. The staff whispered tales of his impossible demands, his contemptuous dismissals, his peculiar and often volatile conversational shifts. Celeste knew the whispers. She knew the tremor in the hands of the seasoned sommeliers, the forced smiles of the managers who dared to approach his table. He was a puzzle none could solve, a language none could interpret. The manager, a perpetually flustered man named Julian, his face etched with the strain of this particular client, approached Celeste, his voice a strained whisper. "Celeste, darling, I need you, for table 7. He's dismissed everyone else. Says they don't understand him." Julian wrung his hands, his gaze darting to the imposing figure who now merely stared at the empty wall, a silent challenge in his stillness. "Just try to be patient. Offer him another glass of that aged sake. Don't engage too much. Just fulfill the request, then step back. We can't afford another incident tonight." Celeste simply nodded, her expression unreadable. Her heart, however, began a slow, deliberate drumbeat, a rhythm she recognized from moments of profound, unexpected significance. A subtle tremor, not of fear, but of anticipation, stirred deep within her. The air crackled with a latent energy, a silent promise of eruption. The polished silver on the nearby tables seemed to gleam with a predatory light, reflecting the heavy anticipation that weighed on the room. Every detail of the room, from the hushed clinking of distant cutlery to the faint scent of expensive cologne and fear, sharpened into acute focus for Celeste. She walked towards table 7, the soft click of her heels the only sound that dared to pierce the oppressive quiet. The true nature of this night, she knew, was not about serving dinner, but about navigating a minefield, and she was stepping directly into its heart. She was the final, desperate hope, a fact that was both terrifying and, to a hidden part of her, exhilarating. The weight of every failed attempt by the previous staff, every frustrated sigh from Julian, every whispered warning about Mr. Kang's unpredictable fury, rested squarely on her slender shoulders. But beneath the light blue fabric and the deferential posture, a current of something far more potent than fear or mere duty hummed. A quiet, dormant power, waiting for its moment to awaken. This particular moment, she sensed with an almost primal certainty, would be it. The impossible problem was about to meet an unexpected solution. The gilded cage, she thought, was about to have its bars tested. Celeste reached table 7, her movements fluid and economical, placing a fresh napkin beside the empty sake glass. Mr. Kong, a man whose tailored suit seemed to contain an almost dangerous amount of coiled energy, finally turned his gaze towards her. His eyes, sharp and piercing, swept over her, an assessment that felt less like looking at a person and more like evaluating an object. He spoke, a torrent of words delivered in a rapid, impatient tone, punctuated by a dismissive wave of his hand. His voice, though not loud, carried an undeniable authority, the kind that brooked no argument. It was not English. It was a language the other staff had recognized as Korean, but its specific idiom, its particular intonation, had been beyond their grasp, reducing them to confused apologies and repeated offers of translation that he had scornfully rejected. He stopped, glaring, expecting her to wilt, to offer the same stammering incomprehension. But Celeste did not wilt. She remained utterly calm, her posture still, her gaze steady, absorbing the rapid-fire monologue. A beat of silence stretched, thick and pregnant with expectation. The air in the room seemed to thin, every nerve ending taut. Then Celeste spoke. Her voice, usually soft and understated, resonated with a surprising clarity, each syllable perfectly articulated, the phrasing imbued with an unmistakable formality and precision that cut through the oppressive atmosphere. She did not translate his words, nor did she directly acknowledge their content in English. Instead, she offered a direct, culturally appropriate response, a subtle turn of phrase that demonstrated not just comprehension, but a profound understanding of the nuanced power dynamics embedded within his speech. Mr. Kong froze. The dismissive wave of his hand faltered midair. His eyes widened, his head snapping back in utter astonishment. A low, guttural sound escaped his throat, a mix of disbelief and something akin to a primal roar. He slammed his hand on the table, the expensive silverware jumping with the impact, and in a single, fluid motion, he pushed himself up, his chair scraping violently against the polished floor. One leg, still bent, came up to rest on the corner of the table, his posture becoming an aggressive, almost animalistic assertion of dominance, his body language a physical manifestation of shock and outrage. His face, usually a mask of stony indifference, contorted with a mixture of anger and a deeply unsettling surprise. "You," he bellowed, the single word hanging in the air like a thunderclap, his finger jabbing accusingly towards her. Celeste, however, did not flinch. Her composure remained absolute, a still point in the storm he was creating. Her expression was serene, almost detached, as if the eruption before her was merely a passing breeze. The restaurant, which had only moments ago been a symphony of quiet luxury, was now punctuated by the echo of his shout and the tense, collective intake of breath from the staff frozen at their stations. The raw anger receded, replaced by a glint of predatory curiosity, a shrewd assessment of this unexpected turn. He lowered his leg from the table with a soft thud, his movements suddenly precise again, his gaze never leaving Celeste. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice now lower, more dangerous, but devoid of the previous explosive fury. The question was still delivered in his native tongue, a test, a probe. Celeste responded again, her voice still quiet, respectful, yet firm, articulating a response that affirmed her position as a server, while subtly hinting at a deeper capability. She did not boast, she merely existed within the space her skill had created. Julian, finally regaining a semblance of composure, hurried towards them, his face pale. "Mr. Kong, sir, is everything all right?" "Celeste, did you?" he started, but Mr. Kong cut him off with a sharp, dismissive gesture, his eyes still locked on Celeste. He spoke directly to her, ignoring Julian completely, his tone now laced with an almost imperceptible challenge. "Bring me the documents," he instructed, still in his language, indicating a folder that lay untouched on the adjacent chair. "The ones for the Jiangja deal. And don't bring me anyone else. Only you." Julian, caught between confusion and deference, stammered. "The documents, sir? But Celeste is a server. Perhaps Mr. Davies, our head of international relations, could assist." Kong merely scoffed, a disdainful sound that silenced Julian immediately. "She understands," he stated, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. "That is all that matters." He watched Celeste, challenging her. This was no longer just about serving sake. It was a summons, an unexpected promotion born of a single, stunning linguistic act. Celeste nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement, and then turned, her apron swishing softly as she walked towards the chair, retrieving the heavy, leather-bound folder. Her mind, however, was already racing, processing the implications of this abrupt shift. She had merely meant to navigate a difficult client, but now she was being pulled into something far larger, far more intricate. As she returned, placing the folder before him, he opened it, his eyes scanning the dense pages of legal text. "Explain this to me," he said, tapping a complex paragraph with a manicured finger. "In terms that a simple person can grasp." And, be accurate, it was a direct order, a gauntlet thrown. Celeste took a deep breath, her eyes flicking over the intricate legal jargon, already dissecting its complexities. She could feel the stares of the other staff, the tension radiating from Julian. She was no longer invisible. She was under a spotlight, and the game had just fundamentally changed. This was the first, terrifying step into a new, unknown territory where her hidden skill was no longer a secret, but a currency and potentially a weapon. The quiet hum of the restaurant faded into a distant murmur as a new, more dangerous melody began to play. The following morning, Celeste found herself not in the familiar sterile gleam of the gilded cage kitchen, but in the opulent, intimidating penthouse suite of Mr. Kong himself. The transition was jarring, a stark contrast designed, she suspected, to keep her off balance, to reassert the power dynamic that her linguistic prowess had momentarily disrupted. Sunlight, filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminated dust motes dancing in the air, creating an almost ethereal glow over modern art and polished surfaces. Mr. Kong sat at a vast, dark wood table laden with blueprints and charts, a stern-faced security detail, a man named Hector, whose presence felt like a physical weight, hovering silently by the door. "So, Celeste," Mr. Kong began, his tone a dangerous purr, his English now impeccable, "you surprised me. No one else has ever dared to speak to me like that. Or, rather, understood enough to speak to me like that." He leaned back, observing her, a calculating glint in his eyes. "My apologies, I misspoke. You didn't speak to me, you spoke with me." A subtle, yet critical distinction. Celeste stood before him, still in her waitress uniform, a deliberate choice by Mr. Kong that she understood as a reminder of her place. She met his gaze directly. "I was simply doing my job, sir." He laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "Your job? Your job is to serve, not to interpret, not to negotiate, not to possess a fluency in a language few outsiders master to that degree. Especially not a working-class hero from, where did you say you were from?" He probed, testing her, trying to find the crack in her calm facade. Celeste remained impassive. "I am from the city, sir. And I was simply ensuring your order was correctly understood." Her answer was a deflection, polite but firm, revealing nothing. Hector shifted, a barely perceptible movement, a silent threat. "I have a problem, Celeste. A significant problem. The Jiangja deal. My competitors are attempting to leverage a contractual loophole, a cultural nuance in the original agreement that my current legal team, talented as they are, simply can't grasp. Their interpretation is flawed. Their approach, culturally insensitive. And it threatens to cost me billions." He paused, letting the figure hang in the air, a demonstration of the stakes. "I need someone who can truly understand, not just the words, but the intent behind them. Someone who can think like them. Someone who can speak to them in a way that resonates. Someone like you." He gestured to the pile of documents. "I want you to review these. Tell me what they truly mean. And more importantly, tell me how we win." The proposal was audacious, dangerous. It was an offer to step into a world of high-stakes corporate warfare, a world far removed from the quiet dignity of her apron. The initial subservience was being twisted, contorted into a new, complex dynamic of reliance and risk. She was no longer just a server. She was a tool, a valuable asset, but still an asset under his control, caught in a web she barely understood. The air in the penthouse, despite its luxuriousness, suddenly felt thinner, colder. Celeste spent the next few hours immersed in the intricate world of Mr. Kang's Jiangja deal, the vast, luxurious penthouse suite feeling less like a temporary office and more like a gilded cage itself, trapping her in its high-stakes drama. The legal documents, dense with specialized terminology and complex clauses, were a labyrinth. Yet, as she read, She found herself not just translating the surface meaning, but sensing the undercurrents, the subtle cultural pressures and unstated expectations woven into the very fabric of the agreements. She saw the places where Mr. Kang's previous negotiators had stumbled, not due to lack of legal acumen, but a fundamental misunderstanding of the social and hierarchical nuances at play. It was like reading a symphony where others only heard individual notes. Mr. Kang observed her from across the vast table, occasionally making a phone call in his native language, his gaze sharp and unwavering. He was testing her, assessing her, watching for any sign of weakness or pretense. She felt the weight of his scrutiny, but it only sharpened her focus. This was her element, a world of language and interpretation where true power lay in understanding the unsaid, the inferred. As she delved deeper, she began to piece together not just the legal specifics, but the outlines of a much larger, more nefarious scheme. The loophole wasn't accidental. It was carefully crafted, almost an ambush. Her quiet expertise was beginning to reveal a deliberate act of corporate sabotage. After what felt like an eternity, Celeste closed the folder. She looked up, meeting Mr. Kang's expectant gaze. "Sir," she began, her voice calm, "the issue is not merely a contractual loophole. It is a calculated misdirection. The language used in these addendums, specifically the preambles and the clauses regarding mutual understanding and respect, are designed to appear conciliatory, but they contain culturally specific triggers. To an outsider, they seem innocuous. To someone embedded in that culture, they are a powerful, legally binding demand for a specific, unspoken performance. Your opponents aren't just trying to renegotiate, they're attempting to force your hand into a public concession that would severely undermine your position, both financially and reputationally." Mr. Kang's expression remained impassive, but a flicker of something, perhaps grudging respect, crossed his eyes. "And how do we counter this unspoken performance?" he asked, his tone still laced with challenge. Celeste paused. "We don't try to beat them at their own game on their terms. We expose the game itself. We use their own language, their own cultural expectations, against them. We highlight the discrepancy between their stated intentions of mutual respect and their actual predatory actions." She spoke with a quiet authority that belied her simple uniform, her words now carrying the weight of deep knowledge. As she articulated her strategy, she noticed Hector, the security man, shift his weight almost imperceptibly, his eyes narrowing, not at her, but at the implications of her words. A subtle fear began to prickle at her, a chilling realization that she was not just exposing a business tactic, but uncovering a carefully hidden conspiracy. The ground beneath them, she sensed, was far less stable than it appeared. This was not merely a deal, it was a battle, and she had just been conscripted into its most perilous front. The simple act of linguistic interpretation had become a sudden, terrifying step onto a path from which there might be no easy return. Celeste's revelation hung heavy in the air, transforming the sterile opulence of the penthouse into a precarious battleground. Mr. Kang's eyes narrowed, a cold, dangerous glint replacing the earlier curiosity. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen, but before he could dial, a sharp, metallic thunk echoed from the outer corridor. Hector, the imposing security guard, spun on his heel, his hand instinctively going to the small of his back. A moment later, the heavy reinforced door to the suite shuddered, a deep groan reverberating through the thick wood. The sound was unmistakable. Someone was trying to breach their sanctuary, and with considerable force. This wasn't a warning shot. It was an invasion. Mr. Kang's face, which had been a mask of calculated indifference, finally broke, a flicker of genuine alarm crossing his features. "They found us," he hissed, the words clipped and urgent in English, his previous cultural testing of Celeste momentarily forgotten in the face of imminent danger. "They're moving faster than I anticipated." Another, louder bang against the door, and splinters of wood flew inwards. The threat was immediate, no longer a corporate abstraction. Hector drew a sleek, black firearm, his posture shifting from guard to combatant. "Sir, we need to move. There's a secure exit through the service elevator in the kitchen." It's tight, but it's our only option right now. He gestured towards a concealed panel in the wall. Mr. Kong nodded, his gaze sweeping over Celeste, his decision swift and ruthless. You're coming with us. You know too much now, and you're the only one who can navigate this particular venom. It wasn't a request, it was an order, a stark acknowledgement of her newfound indispensability. The power dynamic, moments ago still defined by her apron, was now irrevocably shifting under the pressure of shared peril. Celeste didn't protest. Her mind had already calculated the risks, the limited options. Remaining was death, fleeing with them offered a slim chance. As Hector braced himself against the door, firing a warning shot through its splintered surface to buy them precious seconds, Celeste grabbed the heavy Gyeongju deal folder, tucking it under her arm. This was no longer just a business deal. It was a physical manifestation of the leverage they held, a tangible object symbolizing their slim hope of survival. The roar of a breech charge detonating against the door sent a violent tremor through the penthouse, the sound deafening. Now, Hector bellowed, already pulling the concealed panel open. They plunged into the cramped, dark service corridor, the acrid smell of ozone and burnt wood clinging to them. The gilded cage had burst open, and they were caught in the perilous, high-speed flight for their lives. The quiet life she had meticulously built was shattering around her, replaced by a desperate, adrenaline-fueled scramble for survival. The impossible task had taken on a terrifying, visceral new meaning, and she was no longer merely interpreting words, but actively fighting for the very right to speak them. Their escape through the service corridors was a frantic ballet of suppressed panic and trained efficiency. Hector, surprisingly nimble for his size, led the way, his movements precise and economical, while Mr. Kong, shedding his corporate composure, moved with an almost primal urgency, his eyes darting, assessing every shadow. Celeste, her waitress uniform an absurd contrast to the unfolding chaos, found a surprising calm within herself. Her years of observing human behavior in high-pressure environments, anticipating needs and reacting to subtle cues, now translated into an acute awareness of their surroundings. The smell of stale cooking oil, the clang of distant pipes, the whirring of unseen machinery. Every sensory detail was a potential clue, a marker of their path, or an indicator of pursuit. They scrambled down a narrow stairwell, its concrete walls oppressive and airless, the sounds of distant shouts echoing from above, growing closer. "They're fast," Hector grunted, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Too fast." Someone inside helped them, the implication hung between them, a cold truth. Betrayal. Mr. Kong stumbled, catching himself on the grimy banister. His face was pale, his impeccably tailored suit now smudged with dust and grime, a stark visual contrast to his usual pristine appearance. This was a man pushed far beyond his comfort zone, forced to shed the protective layers of wealth and power. "I should have listened," he muttered, his gaze briefly meeting Celeste's, a flicker of something akin to regret in his eyes. "I should have seen this coming." It was an admission, a moment of vulnerability that chipped away at his intimidating facade, opening a sliver of space for their burgeoning, reluctant partnership. As they reached a sub-basement, a labyrinth of pipes and dimly lit storage rooms, Hector stopped abruptly, pressing his ear against a heavy metal door. "They've sealed the main exits," he whispered, his voice tight with frustration. "We're trapped," but Celeste, her attention drawn to a faded delivery manifest tacked to a nearby wall, saw something else. A complex series of symbols, codes for specific delivery routes and storage protocols, suddenly clicked into place. She recognized the unique formatting, the subtle linguistic shorthand used by a particular, marginalized community of couriers who often navigated the city's forgotten underbelly. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm, drawing both men's attention. "Not entirely. There's an old delivery tunnel, used for out-of-hours bulk transfers for the kitchens. It'll lead us to the old market district. It's unmarked on any official blueprints." Mr. Kong stared at her, then at the cryptic symbols on the wall. "How could you possibly know that?" he demanded, his suspicion briefly outweighing their shared danger. Celeste merely pointed to a faded, almost invisible chalk mark on the floor, a specific symbol indicating a long-forgotten route. My neighborhood used to use these old networks to get supplies. My grandmother taught me. It's a language of the overlooked, the underclass. It was a glimpse into her concealed skills, a revelation delivered through action rather than exposition, earned in the grim crucible of their desperate flight. Hector, ever pragmatic, didn't question it. "Where is it?" he snapped, his hand still gripping his weapon. Celeste, leading the way for the first time, pushed open a heavy, grimy door that blended seamlessly into the concrete wall, revealing a dark, claustrophobic tunnel beyond. The immediate physical danger had not only forged an alliance, but shifted the leadership, positioning the underestimated Waitress as their unlikely guide through the literal and metaphorical underground. The Gyeongju folder, clutched tightly, felt heavier than ever, now symbolizing not just a deal, but their fragile, collective hope. The air in the old delivery tunnel was thick with the scent of damp earth and forgotten things, a stark contrast to the perfumed halls of the Gilded Cage. As they navigated the labyrinthine passages, Mr. Kong, initially distrustful, began to follow Celeste's cues without question. His expensive shoes scuffed against the uneven floor, his tailored suit snagged on protruding pipes, yet his focus remained intently on her, a new respect dawning in his eyes. The quiet dignity with which she moved through the grime, her senses attuned to every subtle shift in the air, every distant echo, spoke volumes. Hector, meanwhile, remained their silent, lethal shield, his watchful gaze sweeping their rear, his hand never leaving his weapon. The sounds of their pursuers, muffled but persistent, faded and then resurfaced, a terrifying reminder of their dwindling lead. "They have insider knowledge," Mr. Kong finally stated, his voice tight, confirming Hector's earlier suspicion. "My chief of staff, Mr. Jean. He had access to every detail, every contingency plan." The revelation landed with a sickening thud of betrayal. Jean, a man Mr. Kong had trusted implicitly for decades, was orchestrating this. The corporate villains were not faceless entities, but a calculated stab in the back. Celeste felt a jolt of recognition. She'd seen Jean often at the Gilded Cage, always impeccably dressed, exchanging polite, insincere pleasantries with Mr. Kong, his eyes always a little too keen, a little too observant. This wasn't just about a deal. It was a coup, a dismantling of an empire from within. Her own hidden identity, her past as someone who understood the complexities of underground networks and the subtle language of the marginalized, felt eerily mirrored in Jin's insidious, hidden machinations. They emerged into the grimy, bustling chaos of the old market district, a cacophony of vendors hawking their wares, a starkly different kind of jungle. The sudden exposure was both a relief and a terrifying new vulnerability. Their pursuers wouldn't expect them here, but the sheer anonymity of the crowds could also hide danger. Mr. Kong, disoriented by the sensory overload, gripped Celeste's arm. "We need to get to the satellite office. It's protected. I have a safe deposit box there." But as they moved through the throng, Celeste spotted it. A black sedan, too clean, too polished for this district, slowly cruising the periphery, its occupants' eyes scanning the crowd with an unnerving intensity. They were not looking for a Tycoon but for a Waitress and a bodyguard. They had anticipated her knowledge, perhaps even predicted her escape route. A cold dread seeped into Celeste. This wasn't just about money or power, it felt personal. Her family, her community, her quiet life, they were all suddenly exposed. As she ducked behind a stall, pulling Mr. Kong and Hector with her, she overheard a snatch of conversation from a vendor, a brief, hushed exchange about a bounty and the girl with the blue dress. Her identity, once a shield, was now a beacon. The conspiracy had tentacles reaching far beyond the corporate boardroom, bleeding into the very fabric of the city's hidden networks. This wasn't just a corporate takeover. It was a hunt, and she was the primary target, her specialized knowledge the prize. The immediate danger had evolved into a profound, personal threat, solidifying their unlikely alliance into a protective partnership born of shared jeopardy. The Jeonju folder, still clutched in her hand, suddenly felt less like a key and more like a heavy burden, marking her as the possessor of dangerous truth. The satellite office, a nondescript building tucked away amidst crumbling brick and graffiti, offered a brief, fragile respite. The inside, however, was a meticulously maintained fortress of technology, a hidden nerve center. Mr. Kong, shedding his disheveled appearance with a grim determination, moved to a secure terminal. "Jean planned this meticulously," he growled, his voice tight with controlled fury. "He knew my old escape routes, my fallback positions. But he wouldn't know this," he typed furiously, his fingers flying across the holographic keyboard, pulling up encrypted files, financial transfers, and communication logs. The screen glowed with a sickening truth. A vast network of shell corporations, laundered money, and illicit deals, all pointing back to Jean, interwoven with the Jeonju deal. But as he scrolled, a new, more horrifying detail emerged, evidence of corporate espionage extending to other, seemingly unrelated industries, targeting smaller, community-based businesses that provided essential services to the city's working class, including the very market district they had just fled. Celeste saw it then. A file marked Market Redevelopment Phase 2, with blueprints detailing forced evictions and massive corporate takeovers. Her old neighborhood was next. "This isn't just about your company, sir," Celeste interjected, her voice sharp with a sudden, righteous anger. "This is about systematic displacement. He's dismantling entire communities." "My community." The revelation solidified her purpose. This was no longer just Mr. Kang's fight, or a desperate act of survival. It was hers. It was for justice, for the countless unheard voices Jean sought to silence. Hector, who had been guarding the perimeter, returned, his face grim. "More hostiles. They've found the building. We're running out of time." A countdown to violence had begun. Mr. Kong looked at Celeste, a new understanding in his eyes, a shared moral imperative. "How do we stop him?" he asked, not as a command, but as a genuine plea for strategy. Celeste, her mind racing, saw the intricate web of deception, the elegant simplicity of Jin's betrayal. She understood the language of his deceit, the cultural vulnerabilities he exploited, the arrogance of his assumptions. He thinks he's brilliant because he's hidden behind layers of corporate jargon and cultural misdirection. He thinks no one from the outside, no one below him, could possibly see through it. She gestured to the monitors. His entire scheme relies on one thing, a pre-recorded, digitally signed agreement with the Jeonju Consortium, set to trigger at midnight. It's the final, irrefutable act of his takeover. "But if it's digitally signed, it's irreversible," Mr. Kong stated, his face creased with despair. "Unless..." Celeste's eyes gleamed with a sudden, fierce intelligence. "Unless the intent of the signature can be invalidated. Not the legality, but the cultural understanding that underpins its legitimacy." He's used very specific cultural phrases in the digital contract's preamble, phrases that imply a higher ethical standard of conduct. "We use his own cultural weapon against him. We expose his hypocrisy in their language." Live, before the deadline, she picked up the Jeonju folder, now a tool, not a burden. "We need to override the broadcast to the Jeonju Consortium's board meeting. We need to send them a live feed, not of his fake agreement, but of the truth, revealed in the very idiom he used for deception. We outwit him, not with force, but with knowledge." With truth in translation, the plan was audacious, dangerous, and relied entirely on her unique linguistic and cultural expertise. She was physically vulnerable, but intellectually superior, ready to wield language as a precision weapon against the corporate villain who had underestimated her, and indeed, everyone who lived below his gilded world. The timer on the screen above them blinked. 37 minutes until midnight. The game was on. The climax unfolded with a breathless, breakneck pace in the cold, sterile data center beneath the satellite office, their last redoubt. Hector stood guard, a silent sentinel, repelling the relentless advance of Jin's enforcers, the sounds of struggle and muffled gunshots echoing from above. Inside, the room hummed with the silent thrum of servers, their blinking lights casting an eerie glow on Celeste and Mr. Kong. Mr. Kong, guided by Celeste's calm instructions, frantically worked at a complex console, attempting to hijack the secure video feed destined for the Jeonju Consortium's digital board meeting. "He's locked it down," Mr. Kong gritted out, his brow furrowed with strain. He anticipated everything, but Celeste, her fingers flying across a secondary, older terminal, had another idea. She wasn't trying to break Jin's modern encryption. She was bypassing it entirely, utilizing an antiquated, almost forgotten, backdoor protocol designed for emergency broadcast overrides, another piece of underclass knowledge, a system that the powerful considered beneath their notice. "He secured the main feed," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "But he forgot about the analog backup, the one only authorized by specific, older generation linguistic key phrases." As she typed, a distorted video feed flickered to life on a large monitor, showing the tense faces of the Jeonju board members, gathered remotely, awaiting the finalization of their deal with Jean. The ticking clock on Mr. Kang's watch seemed to thunder in the sudden silence. "Get ready," Celeste instructed, her eyes never leaving the screen. "We have one shot. His agreement is about to go live. I'm injecting our stream into their broadcast just as he does." A few agonizing seconds later, Jin's face appeared on the Jeonju screen, a smug, triumphant smirk playing on his lips as he began to deliver his pre-recorded, culturally deceptive final address. At the precise moment Jean began to utter the culturally significant phrases designed to seal his fraudulent deal, Celeste initiated the override. The screen glitched, static briefly obscuring Jin's image, then cleared to show Celeste herself, her face illuminated by the stark monitor light. She began to speak, not in English, but in the precise, formal language of the Jeonju Consortium, her words cutting through the broadcast like a laser. She didn't just translate Jin's deceit, she exposed it, dissecting his culturally manipulative phrases, revealing the insidious intent behind his carefully chosen words, using her deep understanding of their cultural tenets of honor and respect to dismantle his entire scheme piece by piece. She wasn't just speaking their language, she was speaking their truth. She used his own linguistic weapons, his own cultural assumptions of superiority, to expose his treachery to his very co-conspirators. Mr. Kong, watching her, a mixture of awe and fierce pride in his eyes, realized the full extent of her power. She was not merely an interpreter, she was a master strategist, a linguistic warrior. Her every word was a calculated blow. On the screen, Jin's face, now superimposed as a smaller inset, contorted with rage and disbelief as he realized his broadcast was being hijacked, his carefully constructed lie being demolished live on air. The Jeonju board members, initially confused, began to react, their expressions shifting from polite attention to stunned outrage as Celeste's elegant, damning explanation unfolded. Jin's plan, built on his assumption of cultural illiteracy from his victims, crumbled under the weight of Celeste's unexpected expertise. In that moment, the power dynamic was completely inverted. The underestimated underdog, physically vulnerable in her simple dress, had intellectually outmaneuvered the corporate titan, weaponizing knowledge and language to dismantle his empire. The sounds of fighting above them finally ceased. Hector appeared at the doorway, grim-faced but victorious. "It's done," he announced. "They're neutralized. Jin's enforcers are no longer a threat, but the true victory had already been won, not with bullets, but with words, wielded by a woman who had dared to speak truth to power." In the aftermath, the gilded cage shimmered with a new light. The air, once heavy with unspoken tension, now buzzed with a quiet hum of justice achieved. Mr. Kong, no longer the volatile tycoon, sat with Celeste at a table overlooking the city, not as a demanding client and subservient server, but as partners, equals. The Jeonju deal had been salvaged, Jin's vast conspiracy exposed and dismantled, his reputation and empire utterly destroyed. The evidence Celeste had helped uncover had led to sweeping arrests, dismantling networks that preyed on vulnerable communities. Her quiet dignity had triumphed over arrogant corruption. The luxury setting of the restaurant, once a symbol of inaccessible wealth, now felt like a platform for her vindication. "You saved my company," Mr. Kong said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it, stripped of its former harsh edges. "But more than that, you saved my honor. You showed me what true understanding means." He gestured to the city sprawling beneath them, the myriad lights twinkling like scattered diamonds. "And you opened my eyes to the world beneath the surface, the power that resides in unexpected places." Celeste smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that transformed her quiet beauty into a luminous strength. She was still in a refined dress, though not her uniform, a subtle symbol of her transformation. The knowledge she had always possessed, once relegated to the shadows of her working-class life, was now recognized as invaluable, a powerful currency. "It was never just about language, sir," she replied, her gaze meeting his, a shared understanding passing between them, tinged with a delicate, unspoken promise of more. It was about seeing beyond the labels, beyond the appearances. It was about listening to the voices that are usually ignored. Her transformation was complete. The initial subservience had blossomed into a partnership of mutual respect, a formidable alliance between the astute businessman and the brilliant, empathetic linguist. There were romantic undertones in the way his gaze lingered, in the easy flow of their conversation, a testament to the shared danger and profound understanding that had bound them. The city, once a backdrop for her invisibility, now felt like a stage for her empowerment. She was no longer just the shy waitress. She was a force, a beacon, a living testament to the hidden worth found in marginalized individuals. And so, my friends, we reach the end of Celeste's remarkable journey. Isn't it incredible how often true power lies not in bluster or wealth, but in the quiet strength of observation, in the profound understanding of a language, a culture, a human heart? What unseen talents do you possess that the world might be underestimating? What truths are waiting to be uncovered, simply by looking a little closer, listening a little harder, seeing beyond the roles we're assigned? Remember Celeste, the working-class hero who reminded us that competence and courage are the ultimate currency, and that justice, though sometimes delayed, can always find its voice, especially when wielded by an unexpected champion. Look around you, for the hidden gems, for the quiet brilliance that challenges assumptions and ultimately triumphs. What will your hidden skill reveal?